Jurors and alternates at the hearing. Mr. Durst is present, Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Casnoff, Mr. Bailey, for the people, and joined by his colleagues. I see Mr. Ray also, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Millius, Mr. Lewin. Yes, Mr. Bailey?
No, sorry. I'm ready for the next witness whenever the court's ready.
Yes.
People call Ben Hodges.
Please remain standing. Raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you may give and the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
My name is Ben Hodges, B-E-N-H-O-D-G-E-S.
Thank you.
You may proceed, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Are you a professor?
Yes, sir. I am a professor.
Okay. And what are you a professor of?
I am a professor of civil engineering, actually in the Civil, Environmental, and Architectural Engineering Department at the University of Texas at Austin.
So what is your formal occupation right now?
Right now, I am working in research and teaching in fluid mechanics and of rivers, lakes, and estuaries.
Can you briefly just describe for the jury what fluid mechanics is?
So fluid mechanics, we use fundamentals of mathematics to go back to Isaac Newton, applied to how fluids then move through the natural environment is particularly my area. So we take the mathematical equations and we, in a computer, we will put those in on little boxes and so that we can model how things move through the environment.
All right. So I want to go back to some of your background and your training and your experience. What is your educational background? Let's start with that.
So I got my bachelor's degree at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, which is kind of like the Naval Academy, but for merchant shipping. In 1984, I worked in industry, in various marine industry, sort of coastal things, up until 1991. I got my master's degree in mechanical engineering with a focus on fluid mechanics at George Washington University. And then I went to Stanford for my PhD, which I finished in 1997. That was focusing on using supercomputers to model water flow. I then was interested in working at larger scales for estuaries and rivers and lakes. So I moved to Australia to study with Jorg Imberger, a professor at the University of Western Australia, who was a Stockholm Water Prize laureate, which is effectively the Nobel Prize for water resources. And I was there for 3 years in a postdoctoral fellow. And then in 2000, I moved to Texas to take up a position as an assistant professor at the University of Texas. And I've been there for 21 years and am now a full professor.
Okay. And if you could, the woman in front of you is typing everything we say down.
Oh.
And you sound like naturally, kind of like me. You speak a little quickly.
I'm okay. I can slow down.
Please, it'll make her life a lot easier. So, what, and in your current position, you said your PhD you obtained at Stanford University?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and that was in what again?
That was in civil engineering. Civil engineering is the department, so that's as a PhD is usually just given by a department and not particularly in something.
All right. And currently, as a professor at the University of Texas, what is your specialty?
So my specialty is fluid mechanics. I teach classes in fluid mechanics for sophomores. I teach it for graduate students in areas of environmental fluid mechanics. which is really about how water moves in natural water bodies.
Have you written on this topic of fluid mechanics?
Yes, I've published 65 or so papers, somewhere over that right now. It's hard to know how to count the ones that are currently in process. So 65 journal articles, one small book, and numerous 140-some conference presentations on this subject.
All right. So I assume then you have an expertise on how water moves.
I do.
And what is the applicability of that in your field? Like, where is your research mostly used?
So one of the areas, and that's particularly to this case, is that for the last decade, I've worked with the Texas General Land Office, who oversees issues of oil spills and response to oil spills in Texas coastal waters. So I have been part of developing computer models that predict the fate of oil spills within Texas waters that are used for spill response. So I'm part of a team that does that. In other things, we work in understanding how changes in dissolved oxygen will affect in the estuaries as well as in lakes. So those are some of the things.
And you said something earlier and kind of lost me at supercomputers. Do you use some sort of advanced computers or supercomputers
Yes.
to model these things?
Yes. Very typically what we're trying to do with these models is take a large area such as Galveston Bay, which is 30 miles across, and we break it down into little pieces. Each piece might only be 5 or 10 meters across at the smallest scales. And on those, we can solve then the equations, and you can think of it as a jigsaw puzzle that gets put all together. Sorry, I have a tendency to talk with my hands.
Okay.
So we put those together, and it requires the bigger computer you have, the larger area you can model and the higher accuracy. So we use the supercomputers at the Texas Advanced Computing Center.
Okay. And can you describe what tidal and wind models are and how they're applicable in your field?
Sure. So tides and winds are the fundamental forcing that makes water move around in the environment. That, and of course, you have the rivers, so you have rainfall on the landscape and the rivers run down. When you're in Texas, you don't have a lot of river flow because we're dry quite a bit of the time. So the two things that are very strongly affect the water motion are the tides and the winds. And it's quite different if you're familiar with the coastal area here. Los Angeles has tides that are semi-diurnal, which means that what you have is twice a day you'll have a high tide and twice a day you'll have a low tide. So you have about 6 hours between the tide. And the tides are on the order of 6 feet. So you can think about 6 feet of water has to move out or in 6 hours. In Texas, our tides are about a foot or a foot and a half, and they're diurnal, which means they only occur every 12 hours. So you're only moving a foot or a foot and a half of water in and out of the bay over a 12-hour period. So they're much slower. What that means is that the wind becomes very important in how the water moves. And almost all the estuaries in Texas are dominated by what's happening in the wind, unless the wind isn't blowing. So that's sort of our key in thinking about this. And for wind modeling, what we do is we take data from what's called the North American Regional Reanalysis, or NAR, and that's a big computer model that's run by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And that's a model that combines data. And they take the model and also use all the past data from all the stations, and using that, then they can model how the wind has changed in space and time over the entire North American continent. And so we take that data and we use that as the driver for our model of Galveston Bay, that then we can model how things move in the bay.
Okay. And so with this NAR, as you described it, that's NARR?
Yes.
All right. Are you able to use that data to check water movement conditions on particular days?
Yes, we can do that.
All right. And I take it then your expertise in terms of your research you're doing is primarily focused on Galveston Bay currently.
Well, there's a number of bays we work on, but that is one of the main ones because it's the biggest shipping channel.
Okay. So how did you become involved in this particular case?
So my understanding was that the district attorney's office was calling around and looking for people, and one of the places they went to was the oceanography department at Texas A&M because we don't have an oceanography department at UT Austin. So they went there, and a colleague of mine, Professor Robert Hetland, at that time, he and I were running a couple models. He runs the models for the offshore, that is from the coast out into the ocean, and my models were running on Galveston Bay and the interior. And we coupled those together to have a better understanding of the fluxes in and out of the bay, which are really quite important when you think about oil spills, whether it occurs in the bay and you're worried about the oil getting out, or outside and the oil getting in. So because what they were looking for was things happening inside the bay, Professor Hetland referred them to me.
Okay. And what in particular, before I ask you that, do you have a particular familiarity with the waterway between Galveston Island and the mainland, that part of the bay?
I've been there on a boat when we've done some survey work out there in working with the models, and have driven across the bridge to get there. But it's in our model, and it's a piece that we've looked at.
Okay. So are you familiar with the movement in water in that particular
Yes,
area?
I am.
All right. And what were you asked to do in this particular case?
I was asked to do initially was to look at this to say, the first question was, is there enough modeling data and can we understand something from what we have available? And so what I did was I went back and we took the model that we have and spun it up so that we could look at the days in question. And then what became very apparent was there's nothing really interesting going on from the standpoint of a fluid mechanics person.
We'll talk about exactly your results in a minute.
Okay, so I'm sorry. So we went from that, could I say something about it? And I found that I could. In relatively short order, I could take the data that's available, and I didn't have to create a new model or understand to understand what was going to happen.
Okay, you could use existing models for that area.
That's correct.
Okay. And in particular, were you asked to determine whether if a head had been deposited into Galveston Bay in a particular area at the same time as other body parts that were recovered, whether that head you would expect to be recovered along with the other body part?
Yes, that was in a scientific view. What I would put that as is if a group of things is dropped in the water, are they likely to spread out over a larger area or disperse, or should they all be found in the same area? And with fluid mechanics, you can get eddies and currents that swirl, and so it is possible in a general sense for things to spread out. But when you have the strong winds, this was not a possibility. So that's what we were looking at was that a possibility of that happening?
Okay. And have you ever testified in court before?
No, I have not.
It's your first time?
First time.
So are you like a expert witness where you routinely are called on cases to analyze things?
I have not. The only expert witness work I have done in the past has been for the city of Austin, which was all done without it, just to file for an environmental impact statement question. So I look at documents, prepare documents, and that. So this is my first time as an expert witness.
Okay. And are you getting paid for your work? That you
Yes,
did
I am getting paid.
Okay.
As a professor, I only have a 9-month salary, so in the summer I get paid either by doing consulting work or through research grants.
Okay. And what would you expect as your total fee for all the work you've done in this case, including coming here?
It will be about $2,500.
Okay. Yeah. How did you end up getting retained in this particular case?
I'm not sure. Were
you eventually contacted by someone from our office?
Yes, I was contacted by the district attorney's office and,
Okay.
and asked to participate.
And eventually, did you speak with John Lewin?
Yes,
Okay. And were you provided materials to review?
yes. I was provided with the dive logs as well as all the information that was available and photographs of the evidence.
Okay. And did you look at all of it?
Yes, I did.
All right. And this included the Galveston Police Department dive logs,
Yes,
the sheriff's, all of the dive logs that were done in this particular case?
that's correct.
Okay. What is a hydrodynamic model? Did you already describe that?
So, yeah, the hydrodynamic model is our idea of taking the mathematics of fluid motion and putting them into small boxes that we connect all the boxes together with the wind forcing and the tidal forcing so that we can predict how the water is moving, what the water currents are.
Okay. So you used your hydrodynamic model as well as your results for wind conditions in the area to form some opinions regarding this search area along the north shore of Galveston Island.
That's correct.
All right. And then you took that data that you generated and you applied it to your expertise in fluid mechanics from your 25 years of research and teaching and came up with some opinion.
Yes.
All right. So specifically, did you look at these models from September 28th through September 30th, that time period?
Yes, I did.
All right. And originally, when you wrote your report, you went back to I think the 29th at some point, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Were you then asked to look at it back to the 28th?
Yes.
Okay. And did you do that?
Yes. I looked back towards, actually clear back to the 24th to look at the wind data to see that it was consistent.
So was it consistent?
Yes, it was.
Had the wind conditions changed from the 24th through the 30th?
Not substantially. During that whole period, they were out of the north or northeast, north by northeast, and running anywhere from 12 to 15 miles an hour.
Is that what's called a northern or something?
Yeah, it's a norther. It's a very typical one of two types of standard sort of synoptic conditions.
We've heard some, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as People's 184, page 6. Okay. Do you recognize this?
Yes, I prepared this diagram.
All right. Is this the particular area, from your understanding, that was subject to this particular search?
Yes.
Okay. And did you become aware and familiar by looking at the reports and the dive logs that approximately 5 bags containing various items, some including body parts, were found in this cove right here between this concrete pier and this jetty right here?
Correct.
Okay. And were you also aware that 1 bag containing items, including potentially body parts, was found in this area, on this beached area over here?
Correct.
Okay. So one would be to the left of that concrete pier, and one would be to the right of the concrete pier.
Correct.
All right. And were you familiar that the entire area within that confined area was searched by the dive team, as well as, I don't know, approximately 20 to 30 yards beyond that concrete pier, as well as the areas to the west of that landmass?
Correct.
I'm sorry, is it west?
Yeah, that's west. It's west going, well,
To the left of the pier.
this
Those
way.
areas were
For
searched.
that one, yeah.
Okay. And you took those into consideration?
I did.
All right. This red line you drew, what does,
So the
on
red-
people's,
Yeah, so the red line represents the wind direction that's blowing over this area during the September 29th and 30th.
so this line, it's a little confusing to me. Which direction, and there's a pointer in front of you, if you see that, you can open it up.
So this line represents.
You can extend that pointer.
The wind is blowing from the upper corner down this way. So it's essentially anything that wants to go. The main thing that the currents are going to do, because this is so shallow, that the wind drives the currents through all this. And you can think about the wind direction as essentially the direction the water is moving.
Can I, for the record, I'm going to place some arrow marks on this red line, make sure I'm putting them.
Yes.
So do these arrow marks on that line fairly and accurately depict the direction of the wind?
That's correct.
All right. So what you see on in that cove area, there's now there's a green marking on that.
Correct.
What does that represent?
So that represents, from my perspective, the only places along that side of the jetty in which it's possible for something that's thrown off the end of the jetty for it to go onto on the east side.
All right. So actually, let me just back up. So did you assume that items were thrown in this area off of this concrete pier?
Yes, that was, if something was thrown off the concrete pier itself, where could it end up?
Okay.
That was what I started with.
All right. And did you form any opinions?
Yes.
What opinions did you form?
And my opinions are that if things were thrown off the left side of the pier or the west side of the pier, that they would very likely end up within those yellow lines.
Okay, and is that based on the modeling and the water conditions?
That's based upon the wind driven and understanding what the model is telling me about the currents in that area, that there's no recirculation out of there that can take something elsewhere.
Okay, and you say very likely. Can you conceive of a scenario where they're not going to end up in that yellow area?
No.
Based on the water conditions?
No, I very likely is just the typical way a scientist would say something. There's no way in which those conditions so consistent over so many days, that's where things would end up.
Okay, so if someone went to the end of that pier and threw something off to the left, it's going to end up in somewhere in that yellow area.
That's correct.
You have any doubt about that?
I have no doubts.
Okay, and from your review of the materials, that was within the search area?
That's correct.
Okay, and let's assume someone threw something off towards the right. Where would it end up?
And
or straight off?
Yeah, straight up. And that's the question on straight off. It could end up going, there's going to be a stagnation point there where things could go either direction.
Okay.
Depending on how that separation behaves, that could change. So they could throw something in one spot and it goes off to the right, and 10 minutes later they throw something in that spot, it goes off to the left. So that's what we would expect, the standard level of uncertainty.
Okay.
So it would definitely go to the right if it's thrown off the right side.
Okay, and what is your opinion if it was thrown off to the right, where it would end up?
It would end up on the green marked within there where things were found.
Okay. Any doubt about that whatsoever?
I have no doubt about that.
So I want you to and the wind was blowing out of the northeast steadily through that entire period of time?
That's correct.
In your opinion, was the search area that was described to you from what you read adequate to find any objects that would have been tossed off that jetty?
Yes.
Any doubt about that?
I have no doubt about that.
Given the tidal currents at that time, were they capable of moving any body parts thrown in the water outside of those beaching areas illustrated below?
No.
Were you made aware in this particular case that there was an allegation that the defendant, there was an allegation that body parts were dumped into Galveston Bay during the time period which is the subject of your modeling?
I had been told that.
Okay.
Yes.
We also made aware that all of the body parts were recovered except for the head.
Yes, I was told that.
Were you also, well, let me just ask you this. If it's been asserted that the head could have been carried out into Galveston Bay, into deeper water, or out to sea, or beyond those areas anywhere in the green or the yellow you've put on that diagram, based on your knowledge, your experience, your expertise, is this in any way a legitimate scenario that's supported by scientific analysis?
No, it's not.
Were you further made aware that potentially there's an allegation that a missing head could have been carried away by a blue crab or some other local marine species?
I heard that, and it had a hard time not laughing, because none of the crab, the blue crab or the stone crab, behave like ants and work together. And the crabs are so relatively small, their ability to move ahead, doesn't strike with any of the marine science that I've known.
Okay. I want you to assume that the head was dumped at the same time, at the same general spot as the other body parts, at the same time. Based on your background, your training, your experience, would you expect it to have been located with the other body parts?
Yes,
Any doubt about that?
I have no doubt about that.
Assuming it wasn't either A, not thrown in, or B, someone went back and picked it up and took it out of the water.
It had to, if it was thrown in, somebody had to remove it, or it was never thrown in. Those are the only things that make sense to me.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Good morning, Dr. Hodges. My name is Dick DeGuerin. We've never met, have we?
Not that I know of.
I happen to be a professor at University of Texas Law School also.
No,
And we haven't, that's a big school, isn't it?
it is a big school.
And so the chance that our paths would cross with you being in the engineering department and me being at the law school are slim and none.
Yeah, I cannot say that I have met anybody at the law. I think you're probably the first person I've met from the law school. So,
I was going to say something smart about we hope that you don't have to hire a lawyer anytime soon, but I'll be available.
You don't want our card.
They already have it.
So you've given us two possibilities, as I understand. Either someone came along and removed the body if it was thrown in there, or it was, excuse me, the head, or it wasn't thrown in there. Those are the two possibilities?
Yes, in my opinion, those are the two possibilities.
Or the divers just didn't find it. That's a possibility too, isn't it?
Having looked at those logs and the
I'm
extent.
not talking about the logs, I'm talking about,
I'd ask that the witness be able to finish his question, his answer. He was interrupted midway through the answer.
Well, he said he looked at the logs, so you'll please let him finish his answer.
I was going to say that, in my opinion, having looked through the logs, the type of search that they did, and how shallow that area is, that the idea that they would miss finding a head, either in a plastic bag or even not in a plastic bag, I simply do not think that that's a possibility.
are you aware that they did find bags, a set of bags with blood inside that had a 2.5 foot to 3 foot slit in it, in the bags?
I probably read that, but I am not aware of that or the implications of that.
Are you aware of where those bags were found? That set
No,
of bags?
Not the details, no.
If I were to tell you that those bags were found to the left, that is the west, of where the other bags were found,
Objection misstates testimony.
Sustained.
To the right.
well, my recollection is different than that, but we'll go on. Is it your belief that the area that was searched is adequately depicted in the photograph that's on the screen right now?
Yes.
From the concrete pier, the little at the top of that photograph, from there to Texas City is what distance?
I'm sorry, is what?
What distance is it from there to Texas City? Do you know? Texas City is on the
On the
north-
opposite, you mean on the opposite side? Yeah, that's 2 miles.
Yeah, that's 2 miles, right?
Sure.
Are you aware that only a small fraction of the seafloor or the bay floor was searched? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Are you aware, you said you've been there once. Did I misunderstand that? Have you been out there physically on the scene?
I did not go out to this particular scene. I have been out in those areas around Galveston Bay in a boat for other surveys.
Right. But this particular area, did you ever go out there?
Not right in that. I've been in. I'm not sure what you mean by this particular area. The area shown on the figure up there.
Yes.
I have not been in that area on a boat.
Okay. You're aware, aren't you, that the visibility in the water is almost nil?
That's correct. But the
That-
water is also very shallow.
Yes, I didn't ask you about the depth of the water yet. It changes, doesn't it, with the tide?
It changes, but not very much.
How many different tides occurred in the period of time that you studied? That is, from September the 29th till October the 2nd, 3rd, or whatever you did.
Well,
How
there's-
many tides?
There's one high tide and one low tide a day.
Okay. At the time of the search, was it high tide or low tide, or was it in transition?
I do not recall.
Now, Galveston Island is a barrier island, isn't it?
That's correct.
And Galveston Bay is, if not the largest, one of the largest bays in Texas, isn't it?
That's correct.
For the tide to go in and out, the tide has to go through either San Luis Pass at the west end of the island or the ship channel on the east end of the island. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
And so you have a massive amount of water that's diverted to 2 different places, San Luis Pass to the west and the ship channel to the east, right?
With due respect, it's not a massive amount of water.
Well, let's change the subject just for a moment. You're aware, of course, that since the 2001, there was a massive hurricane that hit Galveston Island,
Correct.
Hurricane Ike. You have to verbalize your answer.
Oh, yes.
And the tides during that hurricane were 8, 10, even 12 feet, weren't they?
That's correct.
And those tides have a way of changing the geography of the seafloor, don't they? They move a lot of sand and a lot of water.
Well, they move a lot of sand and a lot of water into the ship channel where it has to be dredged, and they erode from the barrier islands and tend to pull stuff back out to sea. But Galveston Bay overall is about 12 feet deep, except for the ship channels, and that doesn't change much by the storm tides.
Actually, it's even less than that in the particular area.
That's
isn't
correct.
it? 4, 5, 6 feet deep.
Yeah, it's on the average, Galveston Bay is 12 feet deep.
Okay. And once again, the area, can you give us your understanding of, with that diagram or that aerial photograph that's on the screen now, the area of the search that was conducted?
The area of the search
Yes.
is, so my understanding was that it was along here and then down through here.
Okay. No further than that, your
don't-
understanding.
I don't have the GPS coordinates in my head, no, so.
Well, I'm not asking for
Yeah,
GPS
but
coordinates.
I believe that the area that I outlined on there is reflective of the area that they searched.
Okay, if there's evidence that the maximum was 70 to 100 feet off of the tip of the pier, meaning, well, 30 yards, 50 yards maximum, would you argue with that? Was that what you understood?
I don't recall,
All right.
but
So, if you are not certain of the search area, how can you accurately give an opinion about whether the head should have been found?
when I did my analysis, what I reflected on there is my understanding of this, given the search area, where things would have ended up. And my reading of the search area is that this diagram reflects where the search was covering. So I'm not sure that I understand. Maybe I haven't made myself clear, but I don't believe there's any discrepancy.
You mentioned modeling. That's something that's done with computers and figures and numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever think of perhaps putting an object the size and weight of a human head in the water there and see what happens?
Well, certainly it's all possible.
Did you
But-
do that?
No, I did not.
In order to accurately be able to report what would happen to an object such as that, like a head? By the way, do you know what the average weight of a human head is?
I actually, at one time, I looked up, there's a very good scientific paper on these things, but I don't recall it off the top of my head.
If I said 10 to 12 pounds, would that be consistent with what you recall, or if you recall?
I don't recall.
And we all know that the human head is somewhat spherical in nature. That is, like a bowling ball or spherical. That's a good enough word, right?
Okay.
Well, is that right?
Yeah, that's reasonable, I
Okay.
guess.
And we know from some reports that the floor of the bay is sandy and silty, right?
Okay, yes,
And that it slopes from the shoreline to the deeper parts of Galveston Bay,
that's correct.
to the north and west, right?
Okay,
I think you said earlier in your testimony, Galveston Bay is about 30 miles across at one point.
that's correct.
That makes it one of the, if not the, but one of the biggest bays in Texas, right?
Yes.
Okay. So your conclusions that it should have been found, if it were there, depend on the efficiency of the search, right?
That's correct.
Meaning they could have missed it,
Could-
right?
Are you asking me if I think they missed it?
No. I mean, I ask you exactly what I asked you. They could have missed it. It depends on the,
To the word could, Your Honor.
Could is relevant. Could, but it is, the question is, could one theoretically miss it, or in your opinion, did they miss it? Those are different ideas.
I would say that if the search was carried out in the way that was documented in the dive logs, that they could not have missed it.
well, the dive logs just give reports of who was diving and where they were diving, right?
And the procedures they were using in the diving.
Yes. And we know, it's beyond any argument, that the members of the dive team had to rely on feel alone, not anything visual, right?
They also had a net they were using,
Yes.
but so they were.
Feel alone.
Well, no, not feel alone. When you have a net, you get to see what's caught in the net.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that your understanding is that they drug the area with a net?
They had a seines net that was listed in the logs that they were using.
Were you aware of the diver, the head of the dive team that testified here yesterday?
I have not watched any of the trial. That's not my purview.
Okay. So, once again, let me ask you this. Your opinion about they should have found it depends on the efficiency of the searchers and the area that was searched, doesn't it?
That's correct.
And you tell us, jury, you don't know exactly what the area is that was searched, right?
I wouldn't say that I don't know. I know what was in the dive logs and that I documented on this. I'm relying on my own work because my memory can't tell me exactly what it is. But this was my interpretation of the dive logs.
By the way, you mentioned that you were chosen for this job. There is actually a Marine division of Texas A&M that's located on Galveston Island, or actually Pelican Island, right?
That's correct.
And that is, I'm not sure if how your loyalties go with the historical antipathy of Aggies with T-SIPs, that is Texas, University of Texas people with Texas Aggie people, but it's true, isn't it, that Texas A&M is a first-tier university,
That's correct.
as is the University of Texas,
That's correct.
and especially as is the law school. And
No comment.
but the University of Texas does not have a Marine division stationed on Galveston Island, does it?
No, sir. It has one on Port Aransas.
And Port Aransas, for the jurors' information, is actually an island down the coastline a couple of 100 miles, right?
That's correct.
With completely different dynamics from Galveston Island.
But the research teams, everybody works across
Is that
the
true?
whole coast.
Is it completely different?
Well, yeah, physically they're different, but the research teams work along all the Texas coast.
Okay. So you were chosen, not, and no one that was actually on the ground at Galveston was chosen
That's
to be the
correct.
expert here.
It's because I was running the models. Nobody at Galveston was running oil spill models for Galveston Bay.
Oil spill, that I don't want to mix apples and oranges. Oil spill, that usually stays on top of the water, doesn't it? Doesn't an oil spill
No, it doesn't. Actually, that's not true.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Well, I've changed the question. Doesn't an oil spill stay on top of the water?
No, it doesn't.
All right. Does it sink like a 10 to 12 pound head?
Well, what happens with oil
Question,
that.
excuse me, Your Honor, can the witness be responsive to the question?
I'm-
Does it sink like a 10 or 12-pound head?
Okay, you may answer that question.
Can I explain?
Yes.
So oil decomposes, and the turbulence, the wind is driving turbulence that mixes the upper layer. So some parts of the oil get mixed down in that, and that where the turbulence is mixing down, that is the same forces that would be driving the movement of a head. This is why we say that I've said that it's the wind that's important here, because it's the wind that mixes the momentum from the wind down into the water and moves the water in the direction of the wind. And that's what actually dominates for the movement of both oil in the near surface waters and any object that's going to be driven with it.
Well, so could you answer the question that I asked? Does oil have the same, I'll change it a little bit, does oil have the same characteristics as a 10 to 12-pound human head?
For the purposes of the forcing and transport, they behave very similarly.
Similarly, I believe you said that oil breaks up into smaller particles? Did you say that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you ever talk to any of the swim team or dive team participants?
No, I did not.
So you cannot comment on the accuracy of the reports?
I cannot.
And if the search included areas beyond what you were told, then you have incomplete information about the search?
That assumes facts not in evidence and an improper hypothetical based on the facts not in evidence.
The way it's phrased, it does suggest that, so suggests the fact that it's not in evidence.
Sure.
Rephrase your question, please. It's almost correct.
Can we have that read back so I can change it? I need to know exactly what I need to change.
All right, read it back.
And if the search included areas beyond what you were told, then you have incomplete information about the search?
Do you know whether the search area included areas beyond what you were told or not the areas that you were told?
I do not have any information beyond what I was told.
You mentioned that you had reports of the wind. If it's been reported that there was a norther, we in Texas know what a norther is, but that means wind from the north, right?
Correct.
You know that the prevailing wind in the Galveston area is from the southeast, don't you?
Correct.
But you also know that the wind can be blustery.
That's correct.
And typically a norther has blustery wind, doesn't it?
It depends on what your definition of blustery is.
All right, I'll give you a definition of blustery. That means winds from several different directions, primarily from the north.
No, that's not what I would call blustery. So from your definition of blustery, I would say the norths are not necessarily blustery.
Okay, blustery can include also wind speeds that are variable.
Yes. So
and wind directions that are variable.
when we think about how the winds move, and in particular what you can think about is water is a damping mechanism. So short blustery changes in wind direction are not going to affect the transport in the near surface of the water or even as the boundary layer forms and things go deeper. So what's important from the transport point of view is that the 4 or 5 days leading up to this, the wind was solidly from the north. The average daily speed was somewhere between 7 to 15 miles an hour. On the 2 major days in question, it was 12 miles an hour. And those are times when it's very consistent. Does the wind get higher than that? Yes. Does the wind get lower than that? Yes. But it's always very consistent from those directions. And that's what drives a surface current that then in shallow waters covers the entire depth of the water. So that's why I am confident that anything dropped off the end of that pier would end up on the shoreline.
What is your information about what shoreline was searched? And you can use the diagram or the photograph to point out
The
what you're...
information that I have was the areas that I colored in yellow and green were the areas along the shoreline searched.
Sorry, I missed it.
In this diagram, my understanding is this, which is colored in yellow, and this, unfortunately, the green seems to have been kind of lost, but there was a green area there, that these represent the search areas.
Okay, but no broader than that.
That was my information.
And so beyond the yellow, what the shoreline that the yellow represents, to your understanding, was not searched?
I don't know of any search beyond that area.
Are we talking about the shoreline?
The shoreline.
Okay.
And so further to the east was not searched.
Correct.
Further to the west was not searched, right?
To my knowledge, yes.
And the divers had to rely on feel. Let's forget the net for a moment. The divers had to rely on feel, whether they could feel something.
Your Honor, the question is irrelevant based on how he's limited it. He's asking them to assume.
Speaking of
I
that,
sustain the objection.
The objection is an improper hypothetical.
I continue to sustain the
You
objection.
already sustained
I
it.
sustain it.
keep
I
arguing,
sustain
John.
it, I
Maybe
sustain
he'll
it.
change his mind.
You're just trying to boost your average, I know.
You know, the problem, Your Honor, is I'm having trouble with
Well,
my-
wait a minute.
With my hearing, I can't, I'm not hearing and I can't see.
Okay.
That's the old hearing aid defense.
Can't read
right?
my lips, okay.
How about if he sustains it, I go like this?
Habib, give him a little thumbs up.
I try, I've been kicking them.
As I understand it, though, Dr. Hodges, when we get back down to what the facts are, what we know is there was a bag that was found. There's actually 3 bags all together with the same 2.5 to 3 inch foot slit in it with blood on the inside. You're aware of that?
I will take your word for it. I don't recall that detail.
Would it be possible to take a model of a human head, the same weight and so forth, sink it out there and see where it goes?
Objection relevant to the word possible.
It's fine. Yes, it's possible.
That wasn't done.
No.
Your opinion is based on your review of records and no actual experimentation, right?
That's correct.
That's all.
Yes, please.
All right.
I don't know, you have like...
I'm sorry, I have one other question.
Oh, sure.
I apologize. Have you been tweeting about being here?
I wrote one tweet yesterday, but I didn't say specifically.
Did your tweet say, so the Durst Murder Trial delves into estuary transport modeling tomorrow, and I'm in LA? A coincidence?
That's correct. That's what I tweeted.
That's all.
Okay, redirect.
Or, yes. You have, research, I guess you have PhD students?
Correct.
You work closely with them?
Yes, I do.
Do they find it interesting that you're involved in a murder case?
Yes, they do.
Was that part of the reason you sent a tweet?
I did.
Was that out for them?
Mainly, yes.
Okay. Do any of those research assistants, did you ask any of them to volunteer to give up their head for this testing that Mr. DeGuerin wants to do?
No,
Do you have access to human heads?
no, we don't have access to human heads.
Okay. Mr. DeGuerin talks about blustery conditions, and I don't fully understand what that even means, but I guess I just want to ask you this. The opinions you've given, the testing you've done, the analysis you've given, you've performed, and the opinions you've given this jury, are they based on the wind and water conditions that existed from September 28th through September 30th?
Yes, they are.
The Texas A&M has, I guess Mr. DeGuerin is suggesting, a more advanced, I don't know, oceanography department than University of Texas?
Well, I would say that they do have an oceanography department and we do not, but we are the ones that were tasked by the Texas General Land Office to work on oil spill modeling, and the Texas A&M Galveston was not.
Were you aware that the district attorney's office actually sought out Texas A&M first, the oceanography department?
Yes, yes.
And were you aware that they actually said, actually, the person you want,
Whoa. Hearsay.
from your understanding, how is it that you in particular,
Wait.
oh,
Go ahead.
how is it that you in particular got involved in this case? Who referred you eventually?
So I had talked with Robert Hetland, who he actually called me and said, hey, I think I may have thrown you under the bus. I told the LA that you're probably calling them.
Hearsay?
Not for the
No,
amount
it's,
of
yeah, it's
absurd-
not for the truth. It's not that he actually threw him under the bus. It is
I
for the
think we all
state of
realize
mind.
that's a figure of speech, Judge.
Right,
Still, there's some-
no,
You
precisely.
didn't throw him in the bay either.
No, that's the point. The idea is not the truth of the statement, but the state of mind it imparts in the hearer. So it's not hearsay. It's not offered to prove the matter asserted. So overruled.
But it was Robert Hetland, who's a professor. At that time, he was a professor at Texas A&M. Since then, he's gone on to the Pacific Northwest National Labs. But he is the one who referred me to the county.
And Mr. Heflin, presumably, based on your conversations with him, was aware we were looking for an expert in this particular area, and he referred you?
Yes.
Okay, he thought you were the best person for the job.
Yes.
Wait a minute, what he thought is, that is offering something for the truth of the matter, and it's
I can
bolstered.
withdraw that question.
Okay, I'll sustain it. Then it's withdrawn. Jury's to disregard the opinion of the one expert on regarding the other's qualifications.
There are individuals at Texas A&M, is that right?
I'm sorry?
There are individual oceanographer experts at
Oh, yes.
Texas A&M. Anyone, such as even the defense in this case, is free to contact them if they have opinions in contradictory to yours?
Argumentative.
Overruled.
The form of the question?
Well, let's see. It's not actually for this witness. It is an argument you can make to a jury.
All right.
That's not his realm.
Do you feel you have the sufficient, expertise in the 100 and what odd papers you've written on this topic, in the research you do, with the PhD students you teach, with the work you've done for mapping the area for the oil industry, for your knowledge of tides and currents in the Galveston Bay area and your 25 years experience, do you feel you lack any particular expertise in this particular area to give these opinions?
Clearly bolstering,
Overruled.
argumentative.
Overruled.
I'm asking you, do you feel any deficiencies in your expertise?
No, I do not.
Now, you testified that, Mr. DeGuerin also asked you about Hurricane Ike.
Yes.
Have there been other hurricanes in the Texas area?
Certainly.
I went to Galveston on this particular case, and I saw a sign on a building, a watermark on Galveston. It was like this high, saying this was the water level during Hurricane Ike. The water moved pretty big during Hurricane Ike, right?
That's correct.
Covered the island, right?
Yep.
Well, was there any hurricanes from September 28th, 2001 to September 30th, 2001 in the area?
No, there wasn't.
Okay. If there were, would your opinions probably be different in this case?
They would be very different.
Okay. Any other weather conditions between September 28th, 2001 and September 30th, 2001 that affect your opinions in this case?
No.
So, the wind, according to your testimony on cross-examination, you expect would have moved all items either on the water or underwater to the shoreline in the areas in green and the areas in yellow.
That's correct.
Any doubt about that?
No doubt about that.
So any items, strike that. I'm showing you what's been marked as page 20 of People's 184. You see that bag on that beached area right there?
Yes.
I want you to assume that that bag is found in this yellow area. Is that consistent with
That's-
where you would expect that bag to be found if it was thrown off that pier?
Perfectly consistent.
When I asked about that, they told me it was on the other side, but
That's not an
This-
objection.
You were asking about empty bags.
You know, I'll give you a chance to ask questions also. Okay, go ahead.
This bag, which had body parts in it, or a body part in it, I want you to assume it's found in this yellow area by stipulation of the parties. Would that be consistent with where you would expect it to be found?
Yes, it is.
I want you to assume, showing you page 16 of the same exhibit, that it's agreed upon, stipulated, that a human torso was found in the area marked where there's a red, human torso, where there's 5 floating bags found in the area where there's an arrow marked 5 floating bags. I want you to assume that's true. I want you to assume that 3 of those 5 floating bags in that area were empty and had, each one of them had a 2.5 to 3 foot hole in them, okay?
Correct.
I want you to assume that that torso and those 5 floating bags were all thrown off that same pier. Would that area where they were found be consistent with where you'd expect them to be found?
Yes.
And that's, just to put a finer point on it, in the area you've marked on green, as green, right?
That's correct.
I want you to, if the wind all blows, strike that. I want you to assume this. I want you to assume that those 3 empty floating bags, okay? I want you to assume that they're all tied in overhand knots, each one of them, okay? And I want you to assume that they previously were all contained within each other. In other words, you had a bag tied in an overhand knot. And that bag was placed in a second bag tied in an overhand knot. And then that bag was placed in a third bag tied in an overhead knot. Okay? You understand what I'm asking
Yes.
you to? And that these are the 3 bags we're talking about that are empty, okay? I want you to further assume that each of these 3 bags have a 2.5 to 3 foot rip in them or tear in them, okay?
Okay.
But I want you to assume that at one point they were all inside of each other and they were all torn open at the same time, taken apart, torn open at the same time,
Okay.
okay? Assume when they were thrown off the pier, they had a head in them,
Okay.
okay? And no one came back and retrieved the head. Where would you expect to find that bag?
the back of the head.
The bag with the head in it.
It would be right there along the beach. It cannot get out from, there's no way the currents can move anything out of that little bay.
Okay. Now I want you to assume that someone went to the pier and they decided for whatever reason, I got to remove that head out of the water. Okay?
That's an assumption that's not based on any evidence.
The hypothetical is based on the evidence that we're putting forward, Your Honor. It's an
Okay.
appropriate hypothetical.
All right, I'll strike it if evidence or inference isn't supplied.
Okay. So I want you to assume someone goes back to that pier fishes out that bag containing the head. It's actually 3 bags, triple bag, tied in a knot. You understand my hypo?
Yes.
They rip open the first bag, and they pull out the second and third bags, which are still tied together. They then rip open the second bag, and they pull out the third bag, which is on the inside. And then they rip open that third bag and pull out the head. And then they're on that same pier in that same area and toss the other 3 bags in the water, removing the head.
Okay.
Where would you expect to find those 3 empty bags with 2.5 to 3 foot tears floating in the water?
Improper hypothetical. No facts and evidence to justify that.
Overruled.
Where would you expect to find them?
Anything, where anything thrown off that side of the pier is going to end up in that small embayment along the beach there. It cannot go anywhere else because of the way the wind is blowing.
And if they were found, if I ask you to assume they were found where it says 5 floating bags, would that be consistent with where you expect them to be found?
Absolutely.
That tearing, 2.5 to 3 foot tears in those bags that I've described to you, based on your background and your training and your experience, are those consistent with any kind of tearing that would occur to those 3 bags in that hypothetical I've given you from any natural marine life or in the water?
There's no marine life that I know of that would tear a 2.5 foot hole in a bag.
I want you to further assume that those 3 tears to those 3 bags are approximately the same size, and that all of those 3 individual bags found floating in the water each have their own overhand knot. Okay?
Okay.
I want you to further assume that the other bags containing body parts that were found all were triple bagged. Body parts in bag, overhand knot. Inside another bag, overhand knot. Inside another bag, overhand knot. And those bags, when they were recovered, had 3 bags tied in a knot containing body parts. Okay? No tears, consistent with those 2.5 to 3 foot tears, right? Do you have any opinions, based on your background, training, and experience, whether in the natural marine life being deposited with the wave action there, that those 3 bags, empty, could have naturally just separated from each other and been taken apart and been individually floating in the water?
That's beyond the area of expertise.
Overruled.
What I would expect, if 3 bags together without anything in them were pushed up, what at most you would see is abrasion of the bag and tearing that should be of, the only way this would happen is things washing back and forth, which is not typically what should happen in something like this, where it's being pushed up onto sort of a sandy beach where there isn't a, you know, if we were up in my original hometown of Oak Harbor, where you have, in Washington State, where you have lots of mussels that are clinging to things and you could push along, well, maybe that. But here with the sandy beach, I don't see a way of getting a large hole.
And aside from getting the large hole, do you see a way for the normal wave action to actually pull those 3 bags outside of each other and become separated?
It would take a lot of time. If this were sitting out in the water for a long time, when I'm thinking multiple days and working with the wind and the current, that could happen, but not along a beach area like this.
Okay, and assuming they were thrown in the water, assuming they're thrown in the water off that pier on the evening of the 29th, and they're found on the 30th, would you expect those 3 bags to be separated by anything other than human activity?
No, I cannot see them being separated.
Would you see any need to search the 30 miles across Galveston Bay for this head?
No.
Now, counsel asked you your knowledge of the search area of that shoreline, and you indicated in your belief the shoreline was searched. That area that was in yellow.
Correct.
Right? I want you to assume for purposes of this question, that the following is actually true, stipulation in this case, that a search of the remaining shorelines of the coves to the west of the location where the bags and torso were found, all the way to the railroad tracks, as well as an extensive search of the shoreline to the east was done.
Your Honor, for the record, that's quoting stipulation 57.
Oh, thank you.
So the railroad tracks are quite much further, isn't it?
That's correct.
So if you were to assume that that whole shoreline was searched all the way to the railroad tracks, how would that affect your opinion?
Said that it's less, I didn't think there's any likelihood of anything being beyond that first point. So that just proves that I think I'm correct.
It certainly wouldn't hurt if they searched all the way to the...
Does not hurt to search that, but that's one, and given that at the time they didn't know what I happen to know now, it was probably prudent to do that search.
Okay. Certainly that they searched further than you thought wouldn't make it less likely that it had...
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Now, you talked about swims and dive teams. Just want to make clear, we're talking about very shallow water, right?
That's correct.
We're talking about you can stand up in your waist.
But yeah, and a lot of it doesn't come much over your knees.
So, final question is, I want you to assume that someone says, that the defendant actually says in this case, that on the 29th in the evening, he went to the end of that, he went to that pier and threw these items in the water. And he threw them all there at the same time, the same place, the same location. Would you expect to find, assuming nothing was later removed from the water, would you expect to find all those items found in the same general place during this search?
Yes, but with a caveat. As I said, you can have right off the end of the pier, there can be a separation point where everything thrown to this side of that separation point goes to the right, and something thrown to the other side goes to the left. So things could all be thrown in at exactly the same time and go around either side by a small difference.
5 bags could be found to the right, 1 bag could be found to the left.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay. Still on the screen is page 16 of the exhibit 176, is that right?
184.
184. And it's the one that has the 2 red lines, 5 floating bags, human torso. And what you're talking about, this division point or this separation point, I think you used another term in your original testimony.
It's a stagnation or a separation point.
Okay.
It's the same thing in fluid
So it could go either way.
Yeah.
And you haven't been on the scene.
No, I have not.
Are you aware of the formation of barnacles on things that are left in the water in Galveston Bay?
Yes, I know that they do occur.
And barnacles are sharp, aren't they?
That's correct.
And some of the rocks and so forth are also sharp, correct?
That's correct.
And wave action and moving water action can certainly cause bags to scrape up against moisture shells, other sharp instruments there. It's not all just beautiful sand, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so here's page 6 of that same exhibit, and this is the one that I believe you prepared.
That's correct.
And the north wind is blowing to a point, well, it's just a north line, right?
Right.
And that doesn't describe the search area.
No, that doesn't. That's simply a reference line.
In fact, the search area in the water was much less. Right?
Then Then, much less than what? Than the area?
The red line. The red line doesn't have anything to do with the search area.
That's correct.
That's just the wind direction.
That's correct.
The search area by the dive team search area is much less than inside that red line.
That's correct.
Okay. So if something is thrown off the edge here, the the wind action could push something not necessarily to the shoreline, but in the area that was not searched, right?
No, because you got the distance, you can't throw it from the end of the pier over to that red line.
No, you misunderstand my question. The shoreline, where you would expect something to happen is described on the yellow line that you put on that.
That's correct.
We know now that the shoreline was walked all the way to the railroad track, which is not shown on here.
Correct.
That's the shoreline,
That's correct. but
not the search area. The shoreline is much greater than the search area, right?
Sure. Well, I'm sure the shoreline was searched. So when you say search area, are you meaning search area in the water, or?
You're right. I'm not putting it correctly. The water search, the divers out there feeling with their fingers and not being able to see anything. That's the search area I'm talking about now. That search area was much smaller than what's depicted on this diagram and outlined by, for instance, the red line. Your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. Once again, you never spoke to any of the divers.
No, I did not.
You never went on site.
No, I did not.
And you don't know, other than what we've just established, the full range of the search area by the divers.
That's correct.
That's all.
I have one small area. Showing you page 16 of People's 184. Council asked a couple questions which sparked a curiosity on me. So let's assume that these 3 bags I was talking about that were floating in this area with tears in them, the 2.5 to 3 foot tears. Let's assume that at some point they contained the head. Okay?
Okay.
And those bags were all found floating in this area on this page 16 where there's a mark saying 5 floating bags. You understand where I'm
Yes.
going? Okay. Let's assume that there are some barnacles or something sharp enough to cut those bags open. Okay? And let's assume the head fell out. The head would have fallen out in this same general area between the pier and this jetty, right?
Correct.
So would it then have washed towards that shore?
Absolutely.
And then would you have expected it to be found in the search that was done in this particular case?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
But of course, if the bags were torn before that they reached that division point, the head came out and the bags floated off, the head and the bag could have gone different directions, right?
No. I don't see that as a possibility here.
Well, but you don't know how far off they were thrown, do you? Where is that division point where something thrown there could either go to the right or to the left?
No, that's my point is that if you can't, where the stagnation point would occur, the separation point for whether things go right or left, okay, that's going to not be somewhere where it can be where you're going to have tearing of the bag. So if tearing of the bag is what is happening, that's got to be something where the water's washing it along the side of the jetty, and the bag should show lots and lots of different kinds of abrasions in it as well. And then when the head falls out, it would be along that same point. So it would have an end fate very similar to the bags. Things aren't going to stay under a 12-mile-an-hour wind blowing from the north. Things aren't going to stay in the water. That wind penetrates down into the depths and moves things into the shore.
Assuming, under the scenario that you just described, that the bags are torn and the head falls out, the head's going to sink, right?
Well, I don't know enough about the buoyancy of a head as to whether the density of the head is denser than the salt water in Galveston Bay or not.
Let's assume that the head's going to sink and the bags are going to float.
Okay?
They can go different directions, right?
No. Because the wind-driven currents go through the entire water column in this.
Well, we know that the bags went to where the green line is, and the wind's blowing away from that if the head fell out off of the end of the pier, right?
If the head fell out that far off the end of the pier to where it comes off around the other way, I would expect the bags to go with it too.
No further questions.
Nothing further.
Do something to fill the next 5 minutes that will be better than going to lunch early?
No.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, thank you.
You're excused, sir, doctor. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with the case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll see you at 1:30.